Are we good to go, Dylan?
Yep, we're good to go. We're recording and we're live.
Fantastic. Okay, so hello and welcome. I'm Kim Wilson, producer and co-host of Beyond Prisons. There are many people to thank who helped make this event happen this evening. First, I'd like to thank our comrades at the NYU Prison Education Program and Study and Struggle for co-hosting this event. A special thank you to Dylan Brown for masterfully taking care of the tech stuff, to Charlotte Rosen for jumping in and agreeing to moderate, and Ellis Maxwell, our podcast editor, who handles our social media and many other things. I'd also like to thank our panelists for sharing their brilliance with all of us and agreeing to do this on such short notice. And to all of you for joining us here this evening. Tonight's discussion will focus on the importance of physical mail in prison and how the prison industrial complex works to undermine imprisoned people's ability to meaningfully communicate with their loved ones. Physical mail is a layered issue, and policies that eliminate physical mail are violent and cruel. These policies do several things. One, they seek to destroy the loving and caring connections that people have. Two, they pile on more separation.
I'm on mute. Can you help me to unmute my computer?
Okay.
Hey,
you're not on mute.
I can't hear.
One sec, Andre.
Okay. All right. You got that, Dylan?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. This is how we handle this. Okay.
I can't hear.
I'll keep going. All right. Two, they pile on more separation than that which already exists and makes it harder for people to remain in relationship and community with their support systems. Three, they disproportionately affect poor people. Four, they add another cost onto the already long list of things that prisoners and their loved ones pay for. And five, they expand the surveillance mechanisms of the carceral state in ways that I'm not sure we have begun to grapple with. Letter writing has always been an important form of communication between prisoners and their loved ones. Eliminating physical mail reveals the inhumanity of this system and illustrates that incarceration has nothing to do with rehabilitation or preparing people to return to their communities, and everything to do with using incarcerated people and their loved ones as revenue streams. Letters exchanged between prisoners and loved ones offer a counter to the dehumanization that we experience. Letters, cards, drawings, and ephemera serve as proof of life in a system that seeks our erasure and death. These documents are how we build or rebuild relationships, how we share news, good, bad, and mundane, how we learn about the conditions inside, how prisoners are able to stay connected to their children and families that are outside, and how we prevent more harm. I'd like to introduce your moderator for this evening, as well as our esteemed panelists. First, we have Charlotte Rosen. Charlotte is a PhD candidate in history at Northwestern University and a member of Study and Struggle, which organizes against criminalization and incarceration in Mississippi through mutual aid, political education, and community building. Monica Cosby. Monica describes herself as a grandma trying to do liberatory stuff, subscribing to an abolition feminist mode of thinking, being, and moving in the world. Her life and work have been shaped and informed by the communities to which she belongs, including the community of artists, scholars, with moms with whom she was incarcerated, and whose survival was and is an act of resistance against a system that would dispose of them. As an advocate and activist, she has collaborated, organized, and worked with Westside Justice Center, Moms United Against Violence and Incarceration, Chicago Metropolitan Battered Women's Network, Unitarian Universalist Prison Ministry of Illinois, Women's Justice Institute, the Uptown People's Law Center, and others. Monica is a scholar, thinker, and writer, having essays published or reprinted in Truth Out and in the long term, published by Haymarket Books. She also wrote Solitary Confinement is Used to Break People as well as On Leaving Prison, a reflection on entering and exiting communities, and finally, Restorative Revelations by Monica Cosby and Annalise Booth, published in the St. Thomas Law Journal. Lawrence Posey. Lawrence is a 44 years old and originally from Camden, New Jersey. He currently lives in the Bronx. He is a father of 2 children who are 18 and 15. He was previously incarcerated. Since his release, he works as a manager at a company called Reserve Inc., which is a COVID-19 coalition. He is also a student at New York University, studying at the Gallatin School of Individualized Study, majoring in film and business. He recently started his own publishing and production company called Legacy Works Enterprises. In addition to publishing, Legacy Works Enterprises focuses on youth educational programs and social justice. Lawrence is part of the social justice cohort at the Center for Employment Opportunities, where he organizes with the Participant Advocacy Council. The PAC cohort has lobbied with Communities Not Cages, which has fought to eliminate mandatory minimum sentencing, and advocated for Second Look Act, the Earn Good Time Act, and the Clean Slate Act. Finally, PAC also is in association with Treatment Not Jail, lobbying for mental health programs instead of prison. Michael Pagan is a student at NYU and is curious about the relationships between perception, memory, and narration. He is fascinated by the process of merging poetry with filmmaking and the art of social photography with data-driven storytelling. His writing and photography have been featured in NYU publications, including the Gallatin Review, Confluence, Fire in the Lake, and Missives. And his short documentary series, Afternotes, can be viewed at the NYU's Prison Education Program website. Sergio Hyland recently returned to society after serving 21 years straight. He is an abolitionist and editor-in-chief of the Movement magazine, the official magazine of the Human Rights Coalition in Pennsylvania. He also works for the Abolitionist Law Center. Andre Pierce spent 25 years caged in Connecticut state prisons. He earned a bachelor's degree with a concentration in philosophy. He writes, quote, "My strenuous efforts took place alongside my fight to maintain my sanity in a soul-crushing carceral institution," end quote. He asserts that his extraordinary growth and development cannot be understood as rehabilitation, but instead as Black liberation. Dre uses his intimate experience of suffering in prison to fuel his passion for prison abolition.
Right. So
Go ahead.
Nah,
Okay. All right. We'll figure it out. You're good. You're good, Dre. Okay. And finally, Maya Shenwar. Maya Shenwar is the editor-in-chief of Truth Out. She is the co-author with Victoria Law of Prison by Any Other Name, The Harmful Consequences of Popular Reforms, and author of Lockdown, Locked Out, Why Prison Doesn't Work and How We Can Do Better. She is also the co-editor with Joe McCary and Alana Yulan Price of Who Do You Serve, Who Do You Protect? Police Violence and Resistance in the United States. Maya is a co-founder of the Chicago Community Bond Fund, and she organizes with the abolitionist collective Love and Protect. I'll now turn it over to Charlotte. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Kim. Yeah, so although the events that bring us here today are very much far from ideal, I very much wish that we did not have to constantly fight the efforts of prison administrations to impose policies that further harm and isolate and dehumanize imprisoned people. We were talking earlier, Monica mentioned that it's not quite even harm reduction, it's more like harm maintenance. I think that's probably, unfortunately, a good way to kind of think about it. But despite all of that, I am very grateful and honored to moderate this panel on male in prisons today with such an esteemed and powerful group of comrades. So to kick things off, I'm going to ask each of the panelists to kind of do a brief response to a first question. So we'll go around, have everyone respond, and it's sort of a 2-in-1. So the question is, when you think of male imprisoned, what comes to mind? And then what do we lose as the result of this policy to abolish physical mail? So we'll start with this one question, and from there we'll let the conversation flow. You can tap in, tap out, accordingly. But let's kick it off with that first question. And does someone want to kick us off, or shall I pick someone?
I didn't hear the question.
Okay, I'll repeat the question. Can you hear me now when I talk?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So the question again, thank you for stopping me. The question again is, when you think of male in prisons, what comes to mind? And what do we lose as a result of this policy to abolish physical mail?
Okay. Can I respond or?
Yeah, you can kick us off. Go for it.
Okay. Because now when I think of physical mail, what I think about is a kind of intimacy that it creates. It creates sort of a comfort and a softness, right? And what can be an otherwise hard and lonely carceral experience. And let me explain what I mean by this. So now when a person writes a letter, right, their unique personality is what uniquely carves, or rather dot their I's and shape their T's, right? Their spirit becomes materialized in between the lines of the pages. So when the incarcerated person reads that letter, they're connecting with the essence, the spirit of that dear friend, that loved one. So in that moment of letter reading, they experience a moment of intimacy, right? And that's the softening, right? That's what's needed. And that's what gets lost when you take away physical mail.
Yeah, thank you. That was, I think, a great way to kind of kick us off. Does someone else want to jump in?
Yeah, I will. I think that more than anything else, outside of going home, people in prison look for mail. There's no feeling that can measure up to that in prison when it's only given out once per day. And for that 10 minutes that the guard is handing out mail, everything stops. Even if things are continuing to move, everything stops. Everybody is waiting to see if they have something, because to receive mail is to know that somebody loved you enough to sit down and write a letter to you. And it cuts both ways, because there are those who don't receive mail and it hurts them in ways that can't be measured. And that is the importance of mail. If something can harm you that bad, then it can hurt you. I mean, it can make you, it can heal you as well. And so mail is just a critical, physical mail. It's just a critical, like Andre just said, it's like you smell a letter, you get to see a person's handwriting. You could tell if a person, I could tell when my wife was upset when she was writing me. Not upset at me, but upset at anything. I could tell, and she could tell with me. And these are things you can go back to and keep and look at whenever you feel like it. I had pictures or letters, that I could just always turn to, and they took that from us in Pennsylvania, and they're trying to do it in other places now, but Pennsylvania has been without that stuff for a few years now.
Thank you. Yeah.
I'll build on both of their points. The when mail comes in, when physical mail comes in, there's a sense of wellness that is overtaken by knowing that someone took the time out to sit down and express their self, writing, their heart and their thoughts on a piece of paper. And then when you're sitting inside, the act itself is mental wellness in itself too, because you're taking a part of you and you're feeding the thoughts, the way, like Andre said, the way you dot your I's, the way, you may, curse in a letter, or you may give love in a letter, the way that emotion is expressed is allowing us to heal somewhat, because, it's an inner self thing. It's coming from the heart. It's coming from something that has been thought out throughout the day, that when you go sit in that room and you're ready to just pour your heart out or your emotions out to someone you love, there's power in that. There's power in healing. There's rehabilitation and that wellness that comes with that. So to get rid of something like that is just like, okay, destroying the fabric of rehabilitation in itself, because it's also part of healing. To be able to write when you know that you have made mistakes in your life, and you better to express it without rebuke. And that's an importance in writing. The act itself is feeding, all the emotions coming from both ends, from the people that sending the letters and from the people that are receiving the letters.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, who wants to take us further? We got 3 of you left. Someone wants to jump in.
It's everything everyone has said, right? Everything that everyone has said. I was locked up for 20 years in Illinois prisons. I've been out a little over 6 years now. And about a year ago, I was with my middle daughter, and all we had during the time that I was locked up with were letters, because phone calls just costed way too much money, right? And I was locked up in Illinois. My family moved out of state, so the only relationship that I had was through the mail, right? And so I was talking with my daughter, and she still has letters that I wrote her, pictures that I drew her, right? I still have some pictures and cards and stuff from my mom and my kids from while I was locked up. I think it's a disaster to eliminate paper mail. And it's about all the things that we are already talking about, right? The way it's life-giving and life-sustaining, right? It's also shit. With that comes the idea that like books are next, it's books, it's legal work, and the control of information and the flow of information, right? That's some serious shit.
Yes, yes.
It's a type of violence that Kim, what do you call it? Abuser logics, right? There's not a whole lot of, I want to say this the right way. The methodologies used by abusers and the methods that the state uses for isolation and control and maintenance of power over are very, very similar. So if like you're in an intimate partner situation or domestic violence relationship, they control where you get to go, who you get to talk to, what TV you get to watch, what you get to read, the whole entire 9, right? This is what prisons do, and this is another way of doing that, of controlling all information incoming and going, right? It's so motherfucking harmful to the psyche, right? It is doing exactly what prisons and the prison industrial complex is intending to do: break communities, right? Break communities, separate communities, and keep them separate, to separate families and friends and whole entire communities one from the other. And they're exceedingly good at that. The fuck, we just got to be better and refuse it. That's what I got a whole bunch of shit I want to say, but that's where I'm gonna leave it. Fuck prisons.
No, that's perfect. I mean, I just to say one thing before Ellis and Michael go. Like, I think people don't realize how these scanning devices, for example, like with pictures, how when they're rescanned, like you can, like in some cases, you can like barely see the image, right? So thinking about like if you're trying to send a picture of family, right, and you like can't even see your kids' faces, and there was an article. I'll see if I can drop it in the chat that like actually showed what those scans looked like, and it's just like how horrifying, right, to like not even be able to receive pictures of your loved ones. They just have like hollowed out faces from the scan. So just wanted to kind of like lift that up from what Monica was saying. But Ellis or Michael, either one of you should feel free to jump in.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to kind of you know, I'm asking myself, what can I say to contribute to what's already been said? Because they already hit the gist of it. And on my personal experience, I didn't receive a lot of mail while I was incarcerated. So when I did get mail, it was like a big deal. It was a big deal. And I did 13 years. And I could count on one hand how many times I received a letter. And that's important because someone like me treats mail, physical mail, a letter, as an artifact, as a piece of art, as a work of art. And that's important because, like, in my room now, I have letters on my bulletin board that I look at every day. And that kind of points to the function of the physicality of mail and what it does in the act of remembering, right? And that's important because, like, what do we want to remember when we are in a cell? You know, we want to remember our name. We want to remember our name, who we was prior to that experience, right? And so when I used to, because I received mail so little, when I go to the board to see my name on the list, Pagan, there, it's just like, in a way, someone recognized the officer or somebody processed my mail that I have a name, right? And that was important for me to see. It was important for me to hear the officer, Pagan, you got mail. For somebody to acknowledge that I am not just a DIN number that I was given, and that's not how my family look at me. They don't look at me according to a DIN number, and that's not the totality of who I am, right? And I was inside when they basically gave tablets, right? And I received emails, and it's a different experience, right? Because, like, I can't access those emails now, right? I cannot access those, but I have the letters, the few letters that I do have, I still have them. But even then, like, the process of accessing the email, hooking up to the kiosk and going through that, they're still like, they muted the whole recognition of a person's name, right? It's just like, you just hook up to the kiosk and you just like see an email, you pop it, you read, then you go about your business. And for somebody to say your names, for somebody to, you know, for you to see your name on a list, for you to kind of have that moment to remember personally who you was and that you have a name and you're not just the 09A3320. You're not just that person, you're more, and that somebody in the world remembers that and still believes in that person. And I think that's what comes up for me, you know, is what the physicality of mail does for a person, you know, in the act of remembering, you know, so. Yes.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, go ahead. I was just gonna say that's super powerful, and I think I hadn't even realized, like, it's totally obvious, right, that you wouldn't be able to keep emails afterwards, but like, just, yeah, the way in which that just is so, yeah, that you lose all of that, is just, I don't know, that's really upsetting and important to kind of, I think, center in this conversation, compare, you know, when we're thinking about assaults on physical mail. Great. So I want to give Ellis a chance to hop in before we move to the next question. So go for it.
Yeah, thank you, Charlotte. Thank you, everybody, for what you shared so far. I'll just add briefly, like, I started writing to people in prison as a college student, and it was really, you know, especially queer and trans prisoners through organizations like Black and Pink. And to me, what stands out about Physical Mail is just like the love and the creativity that y'all have been mentioning. It's really influenced the direction of all these relationships, like in so many different ways. Like, I think about exchanging short stories that you know, a friend had made or that I had made, like, you know, exchanging stories back and forth, even conducting interviews or having political discussions, or something as simple as talking about sports. You know, just like so many different directions that can come out of a relationship that just started with Physical Mail. And for me, like sometimes included like phone calls or visits, but oftentimes just like continue to be just physical mail. But that kind of intimacy that so many people have touched on still left a lot of space, and leaves a lot of space now, because I still communicate with people through physical mail, like to grow together and to have powerful connections. So yeah, that's what I want to share. And thank you so much for being here tonight, everybody. I'll pass it back to Charlotte.
Great, thank you so much. So actually kind of, I feel like Ellis, you just sort of modeled a good way to sort of think about this next question. But so I'm gonna put it to the group, and anyone who wants to kind of jump in should feel free to do so. But just kind of asking folks to elaborate a little more on kind of what your experience with physical mail is, and particularly in the role it plays in your relationships with loved ones, either as the person who is inside or now on the outside, how it kind of allows you to keep those connections with folks inside. And if folks want to kind of bring any examples to the fore, now would be the time to kind of do that as well.
Yeah, I can start you off there. So this is kind of funny here. So I've only been home now for about a month and a week or two maybe. And so I was married about a year before I was released. And my wife, I've known since I was a child. We went to school together. And I did a juvenile bid where thank you, Kim. And I was at Glen Mills, and when I was young, and I was back then writing to my friend who is now my wife, and we were corresponding. I was corresponding with her family, and it's funny because when we reconnected when I was in prison, she told me that she thought she had those letters still. And this is over 20 years ago. I said, man, get out of here. And she went down into her basement and found them and showed them to me on a virtual visit. They were in perfect condition. And she read them to me. And the things that I was saying to her over the last few years that we've been building before we got married were the same things I was saying to her back then. And the kind of woman that she is, I don't know that if those letters didn't exist, if she would have looked at me as if I was in a skeptical way, you know, because she could tell that I was the same person that I was back then, despite what people were saying about me because of my incarceration. and she still has the letters, and they're meaningful and powerful. They're important, and like the brother said earlier, Michael Pagani, like he tapes it, he has his pinned up. They mean something. You look at them, and I would just before I pass it off, I don't want to talk too long, but I would just compare this situation to what's going on with the virtual visit thing, because the same way they took letters from us in Pennsylvania and gave us a digital copy of it, digital scan, they're trying to do that with the visiting system. Because of COVID has given them license to practice these things and try to implement them as a more permanent policy. And if we feel like that about letters, imagine the effect that it would have on a person if they do that to a physical visit.
Yes, I mean, so many great points, and like just to piggyback off of the great ideas that we're touching on, right? Because now I'm a very spiritual person, so I cannot leave spirituality, out of the conversation. So for me, like my letters, because I've been down for 25 years, I've been home for no more than 3 weeks. I still have all of my letters going back since 1996, right? I haven't written back of me. So for me as a spiritual person, those letters have a certain energy to them. So when I read my letters and reread them, right, I feel that spiritual connection to my friends, my family members, some who are passed away. So that gives me a certain like spiritual grounding, a certain centeredness, right? And to touch on the point that Michael touched on it in terms of how when you like in that prison environment, right, which is very hyper masculinized, right? You have to assume certain identities. You play certain roles, right? But even though you're playing certain roles, you still feel a sense of, loneliness, because in the sense that you don't have any real connections. You're just playing parts to survive. But with the letters, as Michael talked about, right, it reaffirms who you are, right? That the person that took the time to write that letter speaks to your identity, which gets lost in the prison environment. So when you do read and reread your letters, it reaffirms your identity, and it gives you a sense of like company, if you will, a community, and all that gets lost when you strip away the written letter.
Thank you. Oh, Lawrence, I think you're muted. Yeah, but I see you want to hop in.
I'll feed off of what Mike was talking about, because I didn't receive a lot of letters when I was locked up, through both my bids. I did 7.5 total years, but my letters were from my kids, and they were far in between because, they all wrapped up in video games and stuff like that. So I it's more conversation on the phone than, than anything. But those letters, to me, signified that they took the time out from their daily, school and their video games and their friends to put something down on paper to, just, they talk to me all the time. I was constantly talking to my kids, at least 4 or 5 times a week. I'm talking to both my boys. But the fact that they took the moment to sit down and write a page letter just to, change the dynamic on how we communicate is monumental. I mean, I think it built more of a closeness between us because they took the time to do that, because they, and they really hate writing. I'm not gonna lie, they really hate it, but they did it, and that just speaks volume. And to be able to just, sometimes just write my letters to them, being a father that is not only teaching them over the phone, but teaching them through letters that they can just revert back to. My son tells me now, even now, my youngest son, he's like, I got all your letters that you've written to me. I go back and I read them, and I just like to know, that you stay true to all the things that you say in your letters, or even the change that he's seen that I was making spiritually, throughout, my ideas in life. Those letters he holds close to him because there was a large piece of me that he didn't get to hold close, to physical being, so yeah, that's what writing was for me. And it actually pushed me into writing stories. I mean, I write fictional stories, but, being able to create stories and share them with my kids, you know what I'm saying? Like, it was just a way to bond with them too,
That's amazing. Yeah, that kind of reminds me, I feel like in this question, when I think about it, I'm like, that's the main way I, write zines with comrades inside, right? Is like trading letters back and forth, going through drafts, right? It's actually sort of like not just about building relationships, but also can be like a creative, it's like a form of, building the world we want to live in, building the art we want to see. So yeah, no, that's beautiful. Maya, did you want to hop in next?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, maybe I'll start on that note, because actually the first person I ever wrote to inside was someone who was on death row. And I was a reporter for this magazine called Punk Planet. And I just wrote to him to interview him about a hunger strike he was leading on death row. And he wrote back with a zine that he was producing inside. And our correspondence over the next 5-6 years was based around zine creation, around kind of that creative process together of this zine that he was already building and distributing on death row. And tragically, he was killed by the state of Texas in 2011. And I still have all of the zines, and they've become, you know, a monument to him. And I similarly, I have so much that's kind of flooding my mind right now hearing everyone talk. But when my sister was incarcerated, we would use mail in so many ways that you would ordinarily like just not even think about on the outside. So for example, celebrating. She was always saying, I'll be home for my birthday, I'll be home for, you know, whatever holiday. And if it didn't happen, then mail was how we were going to celebrate, you know? And that was so significant. It was about the passage of time, and it was about sharing something meaningful in a tangible way, you know, that goes so far beyond a phone call. And also with her, all of the letters that I have of hers, she died also tragically, and a way that I think was in many ways caused by the criminal punishment system. But the letters that she sent to me now are some of the most important, tangible reminders of her spirit, you know. And the letters that I sent to her, I know she treasured till the day she died, not because they were so special, you know, not that my letters were so great, but just they took on that greater significance, you know, took on that emotional significance. And I remember she used to love picture frames. I remember I visited her in treatment after the last time she got out of jail. And she showed me that she had framed one of my letters. And I was like, why did you frame my letter? And she was like, there was like one sentence in it that she had been thinking about it for years, ever since she got it. So you don't know what the significance of that is going to be. And I think that meaning is almost hard to even put into words.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Maya. I wanna, if we can move on to another question, but I do wanna keep the floor open just in case anyone else wants to hop in on this. So, okay, I'm gonna move us along then. So the next question I wanna pose to the group is kind of asking, and I think, you know, it's already been perhaps referenced a little bit with the mention, Sergio mentioning the video visits and kind of the attempt by prisons to also sort of push more people towards video visits and you know, essentially like abolish or very much diminish in-person visitation. But how can we understand this move to abolish physical mail and kind of prison mail policies generally in the larger context of like greater restrictions on prisoner contact with the outside world, such as the video-only visitation that was especially very prevalent during the pandemic? So yeah, I just want to kind of open the floor to that, sort of think about these policies in kind of broader context and see what that brings up for folks.
So prisons are sort of like the unsupervised child of the state. They are allowed to do whatever they want. The guards do whatever they want. They treat people however they want. There's no accountability for staff. There's only punishment for prisoners. So the taking away mail, taking away contact visits, like you stated, restricting our interaction with society, what that is doing is keeping us closed off from society. In a day and age where everything is about technology and easy interaction, prisons have done everything to limit that. And it's because if people knew what was taking place inside of prison. Even those people who believe that if you do the crime, you do the time, right? If people saw what was taking place on the deli inside of prison, they would be forced to respond to it. And I've been around, I'm sure the brothers and sisters who've been in prison on this panel or in the audience, they know that there a lot of staff members in prison take their personal issues out on people in prison because we can't fight back without extreme punishment. And most of us are smart enough to know that we can't win that. So we try to play the long game and be smart about it. But that is the larger context of this restriction on communication.
Yes.
Yeah,
I
thank you.
can't-
I want
Let
to
me
give
jump in here
Monica
real
a
quick.
chance just because, but then, yeah, Monica, go for it.
Oh, I'm sorry, Charlotte.
No.
Um,
Go for it. Yeah.
I think I had started talking about this a little bit earlier, in terms of state violence and comparing those methodologies of state violence, of power and control, to intimate partner violence and domestic violence, right? And so it's still very much that, right? That means of isolating and controlling communication, right? All communications, the way you write, who gets to write you, who you get to write to, who gets to come and see you, right? Those kinds of things, who you can talk to on the phone and who you can't, limitations on who you can and can't, all of those kinds of things. It's also, and it extends larger, right, to issues of censorship. And you, a couple of yous were talking about writing to prisoners and making zines and shit, right? Collaborating in that manner. So if there's no paper mail, then why people gotta have paper and pens? Why we gotta have art supplies? You know what I'm saying? All of these things that has such the potential for it is about how we feel and keeping our connections to our families. It is about staying connected to our communities. And it is as simple as paper mail, right? A paper mail, it weighs like nothing. But I remember one of the first talks that I ever was invited to, I was at a thing with you, Maya, with Love and Protect. We were at Grace Place, I think on Dearborn in Chicago, right? And I had said this at the time that, a letter doesn't weigh anything, right? It just maybe weighs an ounce or whatever. It's just a couple of pieces of paper and some ink. But the weight of that is everything. The weight of that is everything, right? The potential for removing paper mail just reinforces all the ways we are already isolated. It's more power, it's more control. And again, it leads up to the different kinds of censorship. Like we know how this, those of us that have been to prison, or you got people in prison, we know how this works, right? We know exactly how this works. So if you cut off the mail, you're cutting off people's access to legal resources and everything else. It is about letters from our wives and our husbands and our lovers and our children and all like that. It's about all of that. It's about maintaining all of that, but it's also about maintaining access to all the rest of that too. Fuck. Prisons suck. Like we can't, this has gotta stop. This has gotta stop. That's what I got. That's all I got.
Maya.
Andre, because I got something after you, Andre.
But yes, I just can't help but wonder whether this is a DOC's, sneaky effort to strip away the last modicum of privacy, because to speak for Connecticut prisons, where I did 25 years, outgoing mail, the letters that we write to our family members or people on the outside, right? It has greater privileges than all other forms of communication. So for example, when we use the phones, we're warned that the phone call is being recorded, right? With the emails and the tablets, we're warned that it's all being monitored and censored. With the outgoing mail in Connecticut, right, we're given the privilege of being able to, write letters, send them out, and not having them censored unless the DOC finds a so-called legitimate cause. But even then, they warn you that, okay, now you're under mail review. you're being warned, right? But if they, so I guess what I'm trying to say is that with the outgoing mail that we send out, it gives us some kind of privacy that we don't have in any other form of communication, right? So now that's important for people like myself who, I'm not the most social person, right? Some of my ideas, right? I feel comfortable only expressing them to a few people on the outside. So for me, the means to doing that was letter writing. So now if you took that away from me, I lost that sense of privacy. I lose a sense of myself, right? But again, I'm just wondering, like, is this their effort to strip away that last modicum
Privacy.
of privacy?
And I'm gonna feed off of that. You think about prison and you think it's supposed to be about rehabilitation, making better members of society as they strip all our programs and stuff away and throw us in these cages, and they start to take away our privacies, a lot of our privilege. But they want us to come back home and be productive members of society, but they want to strip all the things of rehabilitation that was designed. Yeah, we do the crime, we go there and we do our time, but we learn something from that. I had the luxury of going to NYU while I was in prison. But the whole thing is that you're stripping away civil liberties that is part of humanity. It's part of what we are as a civilization. And then you want us to go back out in the world and be productive. But you're destroying us while we're inside. You're not allowing us, being that we come from these urban communities that are dealing with all the disprivilege that we have, and we go through this whole dynamic of from our urban community straight to prison is all designed the same, almost designed the same way, and then we wind up in there, and then you tell us that you want us to be productive members of society when we come back up, but you don't give us the tools. You're taking away the tools that prison was meant for. Because now you just want to cage and make animals, right? Now you want to take our privacies away from us, and want us to be civil. It doesn't make any sense. What we use as mail, because mail is probably the most private thing, letter writing is probably the most private thing we have in prison now. Phone calls are recorded, emails are monitored, even the music you download off your tablets, all that stuff is monitored now. So now our last piece of mental wellness that is only for us and the person that we want to communicate with is trying to be taken away. It doesn't make any sense. They want to create more animals. They want to create, the recidivism. They want to keep the recidivism raging so they can keep big business going, and that's what we got to fight against. I was at a rally today fighting about bail law for Rikers Island and stuff like that. I was going through that today, fighting to change the governor and the lieutenant governor for Jamani and them. So I'm fully involved in change.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I do want us to talk a little bit about this kind of surveillance piece, but I want to keep the floor open on this question as well in case some other folks want to hop in.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say real quick that we also can see how what prison officials and government officials are willing to do and try out in prison, they will be willing to do on the outside as well. There's no separation there. And as like technological advancements, like more digital communication is happening more and more. And we see, like, even in our society, attacks on physical mail for all kinds of things, right? And the convenience being like quicker with digital mail or digital communication. We know that those kind of advancements also lead to increased surveillance. And we also have a lot of people who are really like concerned about surveillance, but I think need to center their concerns in the prison as well. Like, if you're concerned about communication being surveilled or whatever it is, like search history, whatever it is, like look in the prison, because that's like where it is historically and right now. So yeah, I just wanted to add that.
Hey, can I say something real quick, Sharp?
Yeah.
So I just want to piggyback off that a little bit. As far as society is concerned, I remember when I was in solitary confinement, and I was back there with a lot of strong people, a couple former Black Panthers, and I was studying under them. And one of the things that I read was an essay by, his name was, I think, Eddie Griffith, right? And it was about solitary confinement. It was about the prison at Terre Haute, the federal prison. And the Secretary of the Federal Bureau of Prisons had addressed the other secretaries of each prison. And he said that the purpose of Terre Haute, Indiana, the purpose of the prison at Terre Haute, Indiana, was to control revolutionary attitudes within the prison and in the surrounding community. So prison is just a small part of this whole thing. And when you talk about so-called rehabilitation and things like that, that's not the purpose of prison. The purpose of prison is to punish, is to control, is to intimidate, fear, is to do all of those things. And so therefore, there's only one alternative for anybody who doesn't like what's going on, and it's, in my opinion, and that is to be an abolitionist. And that's why I am what I am. I don't think that there's any good that can come out of prison. So even if a person comes out and is successful because of what he went through in prison, that doesn't mean that prison made them that success. That means they thrive despite, in spite of being in prison. And so it takes, and that's a very unique thing right there. And so, especially for everybody that's on the panel right now, I gotta give everybody on this panel right now who formerly incarcerated respect for that right there, because they're not here because prison helped them. They're there because somebody helped them, and then they found it in them to be able to help themselves. And that's my experience, and I know that's their experience as well.
It is.
Hell yeah to all of that. Yeah, so I'm gonna kind of throw another question out there, but if folks are still kind of like feeling this one or want to throw some stuff in, they're all kind of like related in lots of ways. But I did want to kind of maybe pick up a little bit on this surveillance piece. So just as to kind of pose it as a question, maybe, you know, how does the digitization of mail and visitation kind of expand the surveillance capacities of prisons, you know, and particularly of communication by people who are not incarcerated as well as people who are. Just wanted to kind of throw that out to the group for folks to respond. And I just want to say, like, oh, okay, yeah, go for it.
I'm sorry, Charlotte. I'm talking to Sergio. Brother, I had so much respect for you. Welcome home.
Thank you.
When we're talking about, so in Illinois, folks got together, managed to pass a bill that says that you will not replace in-person visits with video visits, right? In anticipation of shit like this. And that was and this was like a little bit before we started talking about it broadly, right? And still was up a whole lot against a whole lot of shit to get that done. But we know, I imagine this happens in all the joints. So in Illinois, it's called OTS, the Offender Tracking System, or some other shit, where they keep track of who visits you, how many visits you get, everything about you, right? Everything about you. So they know your kids' names, your mom, your dad, your birthday, all that kind of shit. They know who comes to see you. They keep track of who you're getting mail from, what classes you take, what groups you take, what movements you go on, your physical medical records, all your medical records, right? Your like physical health, your mental health, like if you're under any kind of mental health care and shit, all of these things are tracked and surveilled. And so when we eliminate paper mail, not only are we taking away that intimacy, but we're making our whole, because we know how it is to have these relationships through the mail, these incredibly close, intimate relationships that we're talking about, shit that we may not talk about to anybody out here. ever, you know what I'm saying? And so it limits that because you know that that shit's being surveilled, right? So it really, it is such a violent, invasive thing, right? It cuts off not only your communication, but the way you do communicate when you can, because now you know you're being surveilled versus that little bit more freedom that you had in the paper mail, right? Again, there's the potential to remove paper, books, all of that from the prisons, you know what I'm saying? It's also a way of exactly that, of surveilling even more about us and moving that surveillance. It's the same thing with like EM a little bit. It kind of takes the prison outside of the prison, like through these tentacles, and it's just moving it into our communities. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, we know that the prison people communicate with local law enforcement that's not even their local. So like in Illinois, you got Lincoln, which is like what, 3-4 hours away from Chicago, but they communicate with Chicago PD, right? About who's coming to see who and shit like that. All of this is because it's not just, Serge, you were saying it, like, it's not just about the prisons. It is the prisons as a central point, but people are coming through. The prison is just like the place where everything is held. It's the disappeared. What does Angela Davis say? It disappears all the social problems, right? And so we're in the prison. We're all in the prison, and so we see it, and the things that they can get away with prison out here, and I think someone was speaking of this earlier, right? Those things that they can do in the prisons will get done out here if they come in the morning. I wish I could remember the way that Martin Niemöller says it. I tried to put it in the chat and I can't remember it exactly, right? And Pat Parker has this entire wonderful ass poem, Where Will You Be, right? If they come in the morning, you know, they're coming for you that night. And that is the way to really be thinking about it. I think, I don't know, it kind of pisses me off because I think that there are times when people out here don't believe the constancy of the onslaught of violence and brutality that happens in the prisoners on a daily by staff, that some things just can be considered mundane. Like, we know which COs like to pat us down, so we're just already ready, right? It is how it gets reduced down to this just everyday thing that I'm always ready to be patted down, that you ain't even got to tell me, you know what I'm saying? So like, some of us used to make it a point of pride to like make them say it. I'm not just gonna comply, right? Prisons having that level of control, this is, people censor themselves now out here to stay accepted, to be a part of, to belong, stuff like that. And we see how this works kind of in the prisons, right? Where, I don't want to say you're putting up a front, because that's not exactly the language that I mean. That's not exactly what I mean. But you're maintaining a certain visage, right? So that you can survive and still be you. So you got to maintain something. And so when you have some mechanism by which you just get to be, and that gets taken, that is such a profound, it's such a profound motherfucking violence, right? It is, it's masking, thank you, Kim. It's masking for survival, right? And I think we all do that. Who is this, Paul Lawrence Dunbar? We all wear the mask, right? I think that, I don't know, organizing around this is going to be hard because there's already so much going on in the world, and in the grand scheme, like, I think we don't think about prisons a lot. And I'm like, obviously we do, we're here on this call, but I think broadly, like, there's still this sentiment that, like, well, they shouldn't have did that, you know what I'm saying? And so it's building around that and trying to make folks, I guess, understand that we came from a place, and by and large, we're coming back to a place, right? By and large, we're coming back to a place. Like, how do you want us when we get there? How do you want us when we get there? And this thing called, also, this is the last thing I'm gonna say, this thing that we keep calling rehabilitation that happens in prison, again, it happens despite prison, not because of everything I took from the prison made for me to have shit, right? It's also, I think it's more of a discovery of self, right? Not so much rehabilitation, but I think it's more of like a discovery of self that happens with study and struggle, right? Alone and with other people, through the mail, through visits, and with your roommates and the people you work in the kitchen with and shit. I don't know, my fear is that like it removes all paper. We communicate with each other through letters in the prison, just sending each other kites. Like this is the ripples out. It's as simple as paper mail. It's that simple lightweight thing, but it is such a heavyweight motherfucking issue, right? And I want to encourage folks to remember that like the paper mail is lightweight but heavy like a motherfucker, like on some quantum shit. That's what I got.
Thank you. Yeah, no, that was great, Monica. And I want to throw it to the next person, but I do want to just create some space in case Michael and Maya want to hop in, just because y'all haven't spoken in a while, but no pressure. But then we can pop over. So yeah, Maya, do you want to go for it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what Monica was saying about surveillance is so powerful, how it's not just the surveillance itself, which is in itself a very brutal form of control. It's also about the self-censorship and the information and emotion that are prevented from being communicated. And I remember, so usually when my sister went to jail, it was Cook County. But one time she was arrested in Lake County and they did not have in-person visits. They only had video visits. And which I say visits, but it's not really a visit, right? It's not even like a Zoom call or a Skype call. It's like the quality is terrible, you know, and you're being recorded. And so Keely knew that we were being recorded, and the things that we needed to talk about in advance of her getting out were things that she did not want to say on a monitored call, that we could have said in person, even if we were just across phones or across that little wall, you know, plexiglass wall. Even if we weren't at the same table, we could still talk to each other in a way that couldn't be heard, but she would not say the things. And part of what she wanted to communicate, which she told me later, was the things that would actually help her survive when she got out in relation to her addiction, in relation to what she wanted to be doing and what we could provide for her in those first couple of days. And as soon as she got out, she started using again. And she told me very clearly, if we could have had an actual visit where I could talk to you and we could communicate as people, that path afterwards would have looked completely different. And so I think that's really crucial when we talk about surveillance. We're not just talking, like, I think sometimes in conservative circles, this like anti-surveillance gets portrayed as like privacy, like you don't want advertisers looking at you, or, you know, and of course it's about privacy, but it's also about just vital information that just can't be communicated between people, including vital information about survival.
Absolutely. Does anyone else want to hop in? Lawrence, yeah, go for it.
What I was gonna say is basically like, you know, privacy. See, when you do the electronic mail, right? And we know that's being monitored. So what it does is doesn't allow us to pour out everything that we need to pour out. So we start to harbor, right? Emotions that we normally write on the paper and we get out, because now we know that we can't say everything we want because it's being monitored. Somebody might misconstrue what is being said and think that, you know, not knowing that we speak a certain language, especially Black and brown people, we speak a certain language to our people, you know, which can get misconstrued, right? So when you start to harbor when they're monitoring that stuff, you begin to harbor certain emotions. So what does that happen? What happens when you're inside and you harbor an emotion that somebody make you mad or somebody attack you in a way that you felt offended, but they wasn't really coming at you? You lash out, because you wasn't allowed to express what you normally used to express in mail, or when you sit down and have those contact visit with, giving your loved one a hug or something, that stress relief that comes off by knowing that is sacred, right? And when you take stuff like that away, you're taking a piece of somebody's humanity. And that's what, violating, certain privacies, does to especially people that's incarcerated.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just to kind of throw this in the mix as well, I think, thinking about how all of these different tools for, inhibiting the privacy of imprisoned people are also like very profitable for these companies, right? So it's like the more that they can constrict people's ability to have in-person visits or do physical mail, the more they can charge people, right? To do the video visits, to do the calls. So like also just thinking about it from like, other people who should be caring about this, right? Like people who consider themselves like anti-capitalist or whatever it may be, right? It's like this, like it all, like everything, all of that work should be centered right around kind of like what's going on with imprisoned people.
Can I just say one more thing on top of what you just said?
Mm-hmm.
And the most important thing to remember about that is that it's not really us that's incarcerated that is paying. It's our loved ones that are taking food out of their kids' mouth to make sure that they communicate with us. It's our loved ones that really suffers the true financial burden that comes with all these big businesses wanting to put their product inside of prison.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a really good point. Okay, I'm looking at time. I'm gonna try to squeeze in one more question before we kind of do final closing thoughts. So one thing that, Delaware DOC, I know also Pennsylvania did this when they implemented the kind of digitization of mail. They often kind of justify it or kind of claim, right, that the reason for doing this is contraband, right? The claim that contraband is coming in through the physical mail and also through visitation. So I wanted to pose to the panel, I think the answer is going to be yes, but should we be skeptical of this claim? And then also kind of how should we understand the rise of this claim at a time, right, when more people are building connections with people inside and there's kind of perhaps more attention to or awareness of like the horrors that are inside our nation's prisons and jails. So I'll pose that and anyone's welcome to kind of take it away.
Yeah, just to speak to this point from a legal perspective, right? Because now I'm not gonna say that, okay, there's not any contraband coming in through the mail. I don't know, but this is what I do know legally speaking, right? Is that the DOC, right? They do not need to make a concrete case, right, to the U.S. Supreme Court, the federal courts, right, to get a ruling in their favor. So if they simply like theoretically say, okay, this could be a potential problem, contraband coming in through the mail, right? If they make that case theoretically, right, that would be sufficient for the federal courts, the U.S. Supreme Court to rule in their favor. And I'm wondering whether or not this is really a theoretical case, whether this is a conniving effort on the DOC, right, to again strip away, people's privacy rights, right, that they are otherwise entitled to, if not for these exaggerated, theoretical claims. So this is what I'm thinking. This is really like just an exaggerated prison concern. It's a theoretical argument, but again, legally speaking, that will be sufficient for the federal courts and the U.S. Supreme Court to make this the law of the land, and that's what frightens me.
Yeah, that's a terrifying prospect. Yeah, go for it. Sergio, do you want to hop in?
Yeah, so I know in Pennsylvania, they actually put the numbers up when they took away the mail and they locked the prison down for about a month because of a fake fentanyl scare. The guards was saying that they was getting sick, and they gave them urine tests and everything, and nothing came up dirty. So we know that that was a lie. But when that happened, they locked the jail down and they put up a memo on the screen, and they sent it out to the public, as a matter of fact, and it said in the last year there were 2,700 drug instances. That's what they called them. But of those, only 300 of them involve prisoners and the visiting room. Outside of that, everything else was staff. And nobody made a big fuss about that. Nobody said, okay, these guards were lying, they weren't doing this, or maybe they weren't lying, they experienced something that they thought they were experiencing something. But they never took anything back. They never said, all right, we were wrong, it was a mistake. They kept it like that. So they use stuff like that as an excuse to just take.
Yes.
Well, we deal with that. Are you done?
Yeah.
Cut you off. We kind of deal with that. You think about the situation, right? Somebody goes home on parole. This is an actual event. Somebody goes home on parole and they wind up murdering somebody, right? So that one instant, now everybody in prison can be are possible murderers when they get out on parole, right? Or they're gonna do something that's gonna be wrong. So when we talk about the contraband, right? One person, a few people can ruin the whole idea for the rest, right? But isn't it, there, CEOs are, correctional officers are glorified babysitters in the first place. They have to have a job to do. And it is to make sure that stuff like that doesn't happen. They get paid to do this stuff, right? And when you start, one or two people having contraband come in, and it ruins it for everybody else. Now you want to take all the mail away because a few people, wasn't able to follow the rule. Y'all caught them, right? Or y'all didn't catch them, but y'all, these things has happened. This is what your job is, to do these things so that, we can still maintain some type of humanity and civil liberties while we're inside rehabilitating ourselves or, habilitating ourselves. But we try not to use rehabilitation anymore. We use habilitation around where I'm at. So, as far as the contraband is concerned, ain't nothing perfect. No system is perfect. Period.
Yeah, and I think, just kind of to Sergio's point, it's like we know that, meaning, it's been shown, right, in places where they've implemented these policies that, oftentimes the contraband doesn't stop because it's guards who are bringing it in or whoever, so it's I think, again, sort of thinking about manufactured problems in order to, right, impose certain things that restrict and imprison people's livelihoods further. Monica, did you wanna hop in?
Really, I'm just saying some stuff again.
Go for it.
In my experience, in the time I was locked up, most of the contraband that I ever came across had its origin with a fucking CO, right? Not from a visit, not from the mail, right? It has come in for favors, this kind of shit. Again, prisons are places of horrible, ridiculous violences and indignities that almost become mundane in the ways that we think about it. We have a whole PREA, a whole Prison Rape Elimination Act. And when correctional officers are hardly ever convicted of that shit, right? Hardly ever. And they're still they still argue consent in these cases. You know what I'm saying? It's, the whole shit is ridiculous. And even though there's a whole thing called the Prison Rape Elimination Act that's federal, most state law where it is illegal for a correctional officer to have any kind of relationships with someone in their custody, it's usually called something along the lines of, in Illinois, it's called custodial sexual misconduct. They won't even call it fucking rape. right? But this is, in my experience, most contraband comes in through fucking correctional staff. There was a point, this happened when I was in Dwight way back in the day. In Dwight, they shut the mail room down for maybe a little over a month because, I don't know, what did they say was, they were sending in cyanide or whatever the fuck. What was it? Anthrax. They were like, we're gonna have anthrax, right? And we all knew that it was some bullshit because we heard COs talking about it. They just didn't want to work in the mail room. They just didn't want to work in the mail room. So they're like, there's anthrax. We're not going to work in the mail room. We're just going to sit here on Hazard Drive. So Hazard Drive in Dwight back in the day was like the main road that we used to walk on to go to Chow or Rec or the Yard or whatever, right? And so they'd just be chilling on Hazard Drive, just deciding what they weren't going to do or what they were going to do to us. Contraband starts with COs. Most 9 times out of 10 is starting with a CO. It might come through a visit maybe occasionally, but most of the time it's not. And if it does make it through a visit, so fucking what? It's fucking prison, right? The catch and come for the hanging, whatever. But seriously, like, what do you expect people to do, right? What do you expect people to do? People have been captured and ensnared into a system that people are just trying to survive in the best way that they can. So if we're gonna like be instead of worrying about like contraband in prisons, consider prisons the contraband, right? Prisons are contraband things.
Oh, yeah.
We need to be eliminating that contraband and get on with the shit. Abolition. Again, and we got to get on our like stuff. We cannot continue to allow, because if it's happening in one place and then it happens in another place and it happens in another place, that's the end of paper mail and everything else, right? It's just a domino. And it's already happening in a couple of places. Like, we have to stop it here. We have to stop it here. That's what I got.
Absolutely. Maya, did you want to hop in? Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, sure. I think what Monica just said was absolutely true. And I think that one of the things that we really have to bear in mind with this contraband question is the war on drugs more broadly. And why is it that you shut down one of the few vehicles for humanity based on the idea that a couple of people supposedly sent in fentanyl, even though it didn't even happen? But just thinking about, like, why is that alarmism the thing that sets it all off? So then you think about, well, A, why do people use drugs at all, and what are the issues behind that? B, why does it matter? Like, why is that a thing that's illegal? And C, what is the broader strategy of the system in using that as a tool of repression and oppression? And I think that a lot of places right now are seizing on fentanyl the same way, there's always a particular drug that they're gonna seize on, meth, crack, looking historically. And right now it's fentanyl. And there are all these myths of like contact deaths from fentanyl. That's not a real thing. It actually doesn't happen. Like, no one who actually knows about it will tell you that that's a thing. But COs are saying this. And I think that people take them at their word, or they even create these fictions as a justification apart from any story, because it's this thing that's in the air, that's part of this larger drug war system. And it's just usable in that way. It's a narrative that's usable, and it's really terrifying. And I think we need to call that out wherever it happens, not because fentanyl doesn't have the potential to cause harm. I mean, my sister died of a fentanyl overdose, but I'm saying that this is a thing that people are using to justify torture. And we need to challenge that disconnect and those lies.
Yeah, absolutely. So looking at the time, I don't want to hold folks over. It is getting late. So I think what we'll do is we'll just have everyone go around if they'd like and just kind of share some final thoughts, final words, whatever is kind of like on your heart right now, and kind of talking about these topics. But before we do that, I do just want to say to folks in the audience that like we are actively trying to fight this policy from being implemented, the policy to abolish physical mail in Delaware prisons right now. And so please check out the Beyond Prisons website, which has a bunch of action items, you know, involving signing petitions, writing various governors and other politicians in Delaware. So please go, we can drop maybe in the chat the website, go there, take action. It's really urgent that we do everything we can to try to fight this terrible policy again, because as we talked about in this panel, it's like if they can do it in more prisons, right, it's gonna just like come to every prison, right? The more it's legitimized, the more we're in trouble. So anyway, just wanted to say that now, but yeah, if folks want to just kind of give some closing thoughts or reflections, try
I'll
to
just,
keep it a little brief just because of time, but yeah, sorry, go for it, Lawrence. Yeah.
all right. I just want to say that, you know, writing, you know, the act of physically writing is mental wellness. And that's just the bottom line of it for me. You know, it's a peace of mind. It's a peace of mind for the person that's receiving and writing.
Thank you.
Yes, speaking spiritually, right? I embrace my male, my physical male, right, as sort of like a spiritual energy, sort of. You know, in other words, I understood when people sat down to write me that letter, right? They're busy, don't want to be writing. It's like a homework assignment for them, but they took their time, right? And they expressed themselves in that letter. They gave me a piece of themselves. So as you know, as I accumulated my mail, we're in prison, it was almost as if I was forming a community with my family members, my friends, you know. So when you take that away from an incarcerated person, you take away a community in a sense, right? Which can be dangerous.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of feel the same way right there. I think that this issue right here is deeper than just a physical issue. You know, it's mental, it's spiritual. It's a connection with a loved one, with the community, and we are social beings. So, you know, this is what we crave every day, and that's the one thing that prison takes away from us. And so the fight is even more important and harder, and you need all the help that you can get, and that's the kind of help that you need right there. And I just left, so it's still on me a little bit. So I'm just out here trying to help any way I can.
Amazing. Yeah. Thank you.
I just come out and say all my homies hate prisons. But I think, you know, nobody, I guess the powers that be, really understand what the community that's on the inside, what they're really up against, right? And the impact that like prison itself is an isolating experience. Then if you digitize mail, you kind of, replicate that isolation, but, in an interior way. So it's like isolation, built on isolation, built on isolation. And it's just like long term. I mean, hey, I've been home for 2 years and I feel like I'm still recovering from, the years of isolation. I haven't even hit the surface of just like peeling back layers and layers of like, and so if you do things like this, it just, adds another layer to what we have to kind of unlearn or undo once we get out, and it's important to kind of, build bridges, build those bridges, and make those connections on the outside, because like they want to isolate us, and separate us and, divide and conquer, right? And And work like this is important because we have to, despite everything, we have to build those bridges and preserve those connections. So I want to salute everybody for, being a part of this conversation. Everybody is like amazing human beings, so I celebrate y'all. So thank you for those who organized this.
Amazing. Thank you, Michael.
Yeah, I'll just say real quick, I think there's a reason why so many abolitionist organizers and organizations, groups, are built around letter writing. So Black and Pink, the core is letter writing, it started as letter writing. Love and Protect, the collective I'm part of, a core activity is letter writing and supporting individuals through that practice. And thinking about the ways that building bonds, building relationships with people can be an abolitionist practice in itself. And as everyone's been saying here, that connection is so much deeper with the physical male and less surveilled. And so I just want to put that out there, that this is also a barrier to organizing. And when we look at this policy, it's that form of political repression as well. And that is something that, on top of every other thing that it means, I think it should terrify us and spur us to act against this policy as well. If we see this as a vehicle for organizing, which so many groups do, then they should be specifically acting to address this policy and to confront this policy. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Maya. Thank you for raising that. Yeah, Ellis or Monica, do you want to share final thoughts? Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I can come in and just say there's so many reasons why physical mail is important, as has been raised here by everybody, and I appreciate hearing from everyone and being a part of this. But also that prisons function as a way to like reinforce this condition of separation, as if we as individual humans are separate from one another, but also separate from life around us in other forms, separate from nature, all these things. And like something like physical mail is just a way to like intervene in that lie of separation and really like bring humanity and connection, interconnectedness into a situation that's really like trying to deny it. So I think that anybody who's thinking, well, what does this matter? It's just mail. It's just one form of mail rather than another. But it's like bringing so much love and light into a situation where it's really trying to be stamped out. So I think this is just one part of a struggle to a larger struggle to fight that idea of separation in all its forms, whether we're talking about capitalism, white supremacy, patriarchy, all of the ways that separation is like conditioned in our society.
Amazing. Yeah, Monica, you want to take us home? Oh wait, I think you're on mute. There we go.
Everything everyone has said, me about quotes. I had come across this Aaron Huddy Roy quote that someone had sent me, and then I saw it again in a magazine, and I only had this one theme. And what it was another world is not only possible, she is on her way. On a quiet day, I can hear her breathing. And I built this whole entire world around that, because having been in some difficult spaces in my life, wishing for a new world, all up in the prison, just with everything that be going on. And so years pass and I get out of prison and I come across this whole was Aaron Huddy Roy. And so at the time that I found the first part of this quote, I had no context to go off of. All I had was that one quote, and an image of Earth as seen from space. And I built a whole world around that. That gave me a kind of faith, right? It bolstered me in a kind of way. And so here's that whole quote in its entirety. And so when I got out and I came across it, I was like, yes, now I know why I love it. And I think it speaks to all of what we're talking about. I hope it does anyway. And it's just like I broke it in. The system will collapse if we refuse to buy what they are selling, their ideas, their version of history, their wars, their weapons, their notions of inevitability. Remember this, we be many and they be few. They need us more than we need them. Another world is not only possible, she is on her way. On a quiet day, I can hear her breathing. Aaron Hadi Roy. And this is where we hold the line, right? We don't let this happen in Delaware. We don't let it happen here, and we don't let it happen anywhere else, because what comes after in the world is coming. And that's what I got. And thank you so much for having me. Kim, I love you. Y'all brothers, welcome home.
Thank you
Thank
all
you.
so
The
much.
panelists could hang
Yeah.
for just 5 minutes after we disconnect. I'm going to say, if you
Love everybody.
thank you everyone who joined us this evening. This conversation is recorded, so it will have a life of its own on the Beyond Prisons website, and anyone else that wants to also host the recording on their website. Thank you everyone.
Thank you for the opportunity.